Okay, so Lee, we're here at Tulane University.
Yeah.
Your debut takes place on college grounds.
Yeah.
Kind of the perfect place to talk about it.
I know, and with all these beautiful trees too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting. I love New Orleans, and I'm just happy to be here.
Under these trees.
I know.
Your book is so much about nature.
Yeah.
And about this character who works in landscaping. That was you too.
I know. Yeah, I was a tree trimmer in Aurora, Colorado, and mostly in city parks and trees on the sides of the roads and stuff. But yeah, I learned a lot about trees, and it's mostly trimming for like clearance so people don't smack their heads on the limbs, you know. But,
was that essential to writing this book?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the characters that I met in that job, I mean, it attracts an interesting kind of person who's willing to climb a tree with a chainsaw. You know, you kind of have to have a high tolerance for danger, I guess, and so it attracts strange people.
And
yeah.
Even then, when you were doing that work, did you dream of a day when you would publish a novel?
I mean, all of this has been beyond my wildest dreams, but I mean, I hoped for it. Yeah, definitely. And I was paying attention and listening to the way people talked and kind of the banter at work, and all of those notes and journal entries kind of went into the book, definitely.
Mm-hmm. How many years ago was
It's
that?
been probably 6 or 7 years.
6 or 7 years later,
Yeah.
you had groundskeeping. I think it means several things.
Yeah.
But why that is the title?
Well, on the one level, it's just what Owen is doing for a living, but
Yeah.
then also there's this idea of, you know, the Cherokee word for Kentucky being a dark and bloody ground that comes up over and over again in the book,
Yeah.
and there's this sense of him sort of keeping this place, keeping this ground, this place close to his heart, you know, as he's, you know, sort of struggling with whether he wants to stay or go, and struggling with homesickness and all of these issues that are important in the book. You know?
Yeah, home is what it's all about.
Yeah, definitely.
What constitutes home, where people feel at home, right?
Right, and not being able to go back home necessarily, or feeling like home is complicated.
Yeah.
You know, especially when there are strong disagreements and everything seemed so intense, you know,
Yeah.
after the 2016 election, which is when the book is set.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. It's interesting that it was a time where in many people's homes, they couldn't sit across from the people they love without arguing.
I know. It seemed like it was hard to sort of just agree to disagree
Yeah.
anymore, because things had become so personal. And
Yeah.
for characters in the book, like Alma, for instance, who's the daughter of immigrants, is an immigrant herself,
Yeah.
it's more than just political, it's a personal
Yeah,
thing for
it was
her.
about humanity.
I've always had the same predicament. When I'm home in Kentucky, all I want is to leave. When I'm away, I'm homesick for a place that never was. This is what I told Alma the night we met. A grad student had thrown a party, and we'd both gone. I don't know how long we'd been talking or how the conversation started, but I'd seen her watching me. That's why I went over. She was watching me like I might try to steal something from her.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome co-host of Today with Hoda and Jenna, Jenna Bush Hager, and debut novelist Lee Cole.
Thank y'all. This is so much fun. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. We're so excited to be in New Orleans, which is an incredible city for literature. I mean, for so much. We ate like you wouldn't believe last night, and maybe drank too. But we're so happy to be here, and I'm particularly thrilled to be with Lee, who is an incredible writer. I hope you have all read this beautiful, beautiful book. Lee, 10 days ago, this baby was published, and now we're here in one of the most iconic literary cities in the South. So I hope you all have read this book, but if you haven't, Lee, will you briefly tell them about Groundskeeping?
Sure. So Groundskeeping is about an aspiring writer named Owen who returns home to Kentucky. He's kind of wasted his time in his early 20s, and he's returning home to live with his grandfather and his uncle, who are Trump supporters. And he gets a job as a groundskeeper at a small college. in exchange for which he's allowed to take some writing courses. And it's here that he meets Alma, who comes from a very different background. She grew up in the kind of affluent suburbs of DC, and she's the daughter of Bosnian immigrants. And she's a visiting writer at the school, and they begin a secret relationship, and complications arise after that.
Yeah, they sure do. Okay, I particularly, as a reader, love the beginning and ends of books. And this first sentence, or sentences, are some of my favorite. I've always had the same predicament. When I'm home in Kentucky, all I want is to leave. When I'm away, I'm homesick for a place that never was. So this was sort of the thesis of the whole book.
Yeah, I put it right in the beginning. Yeah, I mean, it was the first line that came to me. I was kind of in this period of writer's block. I had been in grad school in Iowa and stuck around for a third year, and was really struggling to think of a topic or a kind of emotional question or problem that I felt like would sustain my interest over the course of writing a book, which I knew could take a long time. And so one day, in a moment of frustration, I just kind of forced myself to distill it down into one sentence, like what's been the perennial problem in my own life? What keeps coming back to me? And what I came up with was the first line, just that when I'm home, I want to leave, and when I'm away, I'm homesick. Yeah, and everything that came after was sort of filtered through that almost, you know.
Yeah. It's, I think, a sentiment a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah.
And you were, not a groundskeeper, but you...
Tree trimmer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much of this is you? How much of Owen is you?
Well, you know, it's fictional, so everything is exaggerated, and a lot of the characters are composite characters. But it does have its basis in my experiences of tree trimming and homesickness and just trying to navigate, you know, the love that I have for my family and for my home with the disagreements that we've had in the last few years when the political landscape seems to have become very, very personal and intense.
Yeah, that is my favorite part of this book, is that there's nuance in a time where there wasn't much nuance, you know, where families couldn't sit across from each other. And although, well, at least in this book, and I don't know if it's you personally, there were political disagreements.
Yeah.
There was such a love of family.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what we've been missing. When people can't sit across from their family members and have a conversation, our country is not in a great spot. So was that something you hoped to convey, or it just came out after you wrote it?
I just wanted to write a book about real people, and people who weren't defined by the way that they voted or their political affiliation, you know, people who contain multitudes and are complicated. So that was my goal, and I hope that comes across in the book.
Yeah, you did that, and thank
thank
God. It was really refreshing to read. I noticed that you dedicated this book to Creston Shelton.
Yeah.
That was your granddad.
Yeah, I mean, of all the characters, he's, you know, the character of the grandfather is probably most closely based on someone in my life, on my own grandfather. And I think part of writing this character was sort of just bringing him back for a little bit and spending more time with him.
Well, I loved the grandfather in the book. What do you think your granddad would think of all this?
I think he'd be really tickled by it. You know, he had like this really great laugh. I can see him sort of watching this on TV and slapping his knee and laughing. I'm sure he'd be really tickled by it. Yeah.
As we were talking before, and let's go back a little bit to this. You did work as in landscaping, and so much of this book, you know, has that as the background, has these plants, and has Owen working with this really interesting, colorful group of characters. Could you have written this book without that job?
No, I don't think so. I mean, working as a tree trimmer, you meet a lot of interesting characters because it takes a certain kind of person who's willing to climb a tree with a chainsaw. And so it attracts characters, And so I took a lot of notes and journal entries when I was doing that, and wrote about kind of the jokes that people make on job sites and the banter, and all of that sort of found its way into the book. And then just the idea of groundskeeping was thematically resonant, I think, for me writing the book. There's this notion that comes up that the Cherokee word for Kentucky meant a dark and bloody ground, and there's this sense of Owen kind of keeping this place for better or worse in his heart, as he's sort of struggling with, do I stay or do I go, and struggling with homesickness and all that.
Let's talk about Kentucky.
Yeah.
Kentucky to me felt like a main character in this novel, really important. It's a novel about place, above really anything else, as we've talked about.
Yeah.
The Crackle Barrel.
Yeah.
I'm from Texas, I love a Crackle Barrel. The flea markets.
Yeah.
How important was it for you to pay tribute to a place that I know you have a kind of a complicated relationship with?
Yeah, well, it's not so. In some ways, I felt like I didn't have a choice because it's like the only place I know well enough to write about. This is old Louisville. And places like Cracker Barrel. I grew up going to Cracker Barrel all the time. And what's interesting about the state? There are a lot of things that are interesting about it. Owen mentions in the book that it produced both Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis, our country's sort of most antipodal figures. And so in that way, it feels kind of microcosmic. But it's also interesting because, for my family at least, and for a lot of people in Kentucky, the agrarian past isn't so far removed. People still remember it, and, the kind of Walmartification or strip malls and all of that is sort of a new thing. It's a novelty in a lot of ways. And so that tension interests me, sort of people coming from a life of farming and sort of confronting this new world.
Let's talk a little bit about Alma.
Sure.
Why create this kind of love story as part of the center of this?
Yeah, well, I wanted her to be very different from Owen, and I think that's always makes for a good love story when people are coming from very opposite worldviews or different places. But the book is also about displacement and homesickness and not being able to return home. And it's hard to imagine a group that has greater claim to those feelings than Bosnian refugees, as Alma is and as her family is. And they escaped from genocide and war and came to this country and built a life basically out of nothing. So thematically, I felt like that was important. And then also, 2016 was a dangerous and difficult time for immigrants and for Muslims, and especially for Muslim immigrants. And so for Alma, the stakes are very high. They're not just political, they're personal. And the stakes are high when she goes to meet Owen's family who voted for Trump, and that creates tension.
And Owen meeting her family, too.
The reverse, too, definitely.
I loved that whole section.
Thank you.
Will you talk a little bit about your schooling and like when you knew you wanted to write?
Yeah, well, as far as, knowing that I wanted to write, it was always sort of a hobby or something that I was doing whenever I had time throughout my early 20s. But I didn't really get serious about it until I moved back to Kentucky, and I got a job at a UPS warehouse in Louisville, sort of unloading freight from airplanes. And the deal there was that they would pay for my tuition to take a class. And so I took some writing classes at U of L, and I had teachers there who had gone to Iowa, and they said, you should apply. They encouraged me to apply, and I did, not thinking I would get in. And I can remember getting the call that I had gotten in and thinking it was spam. I almost didn't answer it, because I was like, I don't know anybody in Iowa City. It was really life-changing, and I feel really lucky to have gone there and to met all of the great writers and teachers that I did, and so that was really important.
What are some of your favorite writers, some of your favorite books? Are there any books that inspired this one?
Yeah, well, one of my favorite writers is Bobby Ann Mason, who's a Western Kentucky writer who was a big influence on me. And she wrote a lot of great stories about Kentucky, and she wrote a novel called In Country that was made into a Bruce Willis movie. It was filmed in Paducah, actually. And, you know, she was writing about this time in the 80s when sort of what I was talking about, people were coming to confront like the shopping mall. It was this new, strange thing that was arriving in these farm towns, you know, or the strip mall or Walmart or whatever, and kind of the novelty of that. And then when I was writing this, I was reading a lot of Lucia Berlin, who I absolutely love. And I don't know exactly how I could say that she influenced it, except that she just has such a warmth for her characters and such obvious empathy in her stories, and I think I wanted to capture that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you captured it.
No, thank you.
I mean, I think one of the reasons why this book resonates so much is that empathy, particularly in the time period that you write about, was something that was missing from the conversation. One of the conflicts in this is that Alma and Owen are both writers, and Owen writes about their life, which she doesn't really love. How much, like, as a writer, it's something I've thought about when I've written about my family or myself. How much did you think about in terms of your own story, putting any of your own in this? And how did your family, I mean, I know it's a novel, but how did they react? What did they think?
Well, they've been good sports about it, but, you know, like I've said, it's pretty exaggerated. You know? So it's not like a one-to-one relationship between the characters and people in my life. But that tension between writers of who gets to claim material was something that I hadn't really thought about until I was in grad school and I was surrounded by other writers. And, you know, if you go out, you hang out with writers and you both see some weird thing, you know, it's not uncommon to say, oh, I called dibs on that. You can't write about that, you know. So that tension was new to me, though, and I thought it was interesting.
So in a world that can feel sometimes fraught, what, as a writer and somebody who's studied literature and also studied the tools to writing, what have you learned that could maybe heal?
You know, that's kind of the underlying faith or something of writing, is that Whitman quote that people contain multitudes, you know. You have to believe that. You have to believe that no character is simply evil or, you know, simply good, that they're flawed and they have all of these facets. And so it really just all comes down to empathy. And I think if people, you know, could take that writerly tool, you know, that's been helpful for me and apply it in life, then maybe we'd be in a better place as a country.
Okay, I'm going to end with this, and then I know we have questions from the audience, but I loved this review. I think it was at the New York Times, that said, groundskeeping puts a fresh spin on a divided self during a divided time. Do you feel like they got that right?
I think so. I mean, I think that the divisions in the country are kind of, it's like the divisions in Owen's life are almost microcosmic. You know, they're standing in for sort of these larger issues and problems in the country. That was my hope, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lee. And I know we have some questions.
First off, good morning.
Morning.
My name is Julius Ezeb Jr. I'm from St. Augustine High School. I'm a senior there. And first, I'd like to say I love the book.
Thank you.
I think it was very inspirational towards writers who are have situational roadblocks.
Yeah.
So it definitely was very inspirational. But with that, I can't help but ask the question, how did you convey the emotional scarring lessons throughout the book? Because to me, they're placed very strategically. And how did you make them so digestible to the readers?
Wow. You should be sitting here and doing my job.
Well, I think Owen is constantly having to learn lessons throughout the book. I think the main sort of, not that the book has a moral or any one particular lesson, but I think if I had to boil it down, it's that whatever you think about a person, they're always more complicated than that, you know. And that's a lesson that Owen has to keep learning again and again. He keeps forgetting that, you know, and people keep reminding him, you know, that the characters around him keep surprising him in ways that he can't account for, you know. And that's sort of mirrored in, you know, the writer sort of writing the book. It's you always have to be prepared for your characters to surprise you, and whenever you think that you know them, they always throw a curveball to you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Honor. I'm a junior at Tulane, and I guess my question for you is like, what lessons can we all learn from Owen and Alma's relationship, especially as it relates to like socioeconomic and political unity, like in the divided nation?
Wow. Wow. Again,
That's a good
why aren't you
question.
sitting here? It's a really good question.
The book is a love story, but it's not an easy love. You know, it's a messy, kind of complicated love. And, you know, I think that's okay. It's like they're just trying to figure it out, and it's about each of them are growing as characters. So it's not that their relationship is incidental. I mean, it's important in the book, but it's more about each of them growing as people, and they've changed a lot by the end, you know, and they've learned to appreciate each other's backgrounds a little bit more.
Hi, Lee. Thank you for this beautiful narrative. I think it's just a great time capsule of our time right now. One of my favorite themes in the book is this idea of how we sort of see and accept ourselves, and the tension between that and how we're seen and accepted by other people, and how those things can be the same but pull on each other in the at the same time. And to Jenna's point, too, about how do you sort of write that tension about your life and experience and people that you know without making it journalism, as you said in the book? And how do you sort of stretch out those edges of people and experiences so that tension is captured, but it's not just what you've seen happen?
These are such good questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think to the first part of your question, sort of about seeing yourself versus the way other people see you. I mean, having this be a love story about a relationship was, I think, an important part, because anytime you meet somebody, there's this level of self-consciousness, and you're seeing yourself newly through their eyes, you know, and you're seeing, you know, you're imagining, well, what will this person think about my family, or what will they think about, you know, my background or whatever. So there's this automatic kind of self-consciousness for Owen in the book. And you're right, it creates this kind of discrepancy between, like, you know, how does he see himself versus how does Alma see him, or how will Alma's family see him. And, you know, it's just a matter of kind of, as far as, you know, exaggerating or fictionalizing, you know, you just kind of have to make composite characters and draw on a lot of different sources, and know when to exaggerate, but when to make that exaggeration, or when to dial it back if it's not feeling quite plausible, you know. I mean, it all sort of goes toward heightening the tension, heightening the conflict, you know, in a way that doesn't feel, you know, forced, I guess. Yeah.
Hi. First, I just want to say I love the book, so I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you.
And I was just wondering if you felt an added pressure to accurately represent the people of rural Kentucky as a whole, because that was the community that you grew up around.
That's a great question. Definitely. I mean, I find myself feeling, you know, really sensitive to that. And, you know, when I live in New York, and whenever I hear someone, you know, say something about Kentucky, I get very defensive, you know, because it's like, you don't know them, you know. But then the opposite is true when I'm home in Kentucky and I hear my family say something about liberals in the city. I'm like, well, you don't know them, you know. So it's like these two camps never meet each other, you know. And so I find myself being sort of defensive depending on where I am. But yeah, it was really important to me writing about rural Kentucky, to not reduce anyone to kind of a caricature or anything like that. You know?
Well, you did a really, really beautiful job. And I don't want this to be over, so I'm trying to lengthen it out as long as possible. But I just want to thank you so much, Lee, for writing this book. And I'm so thrilled that we get to talk about groundskeeping with all of y'all. And Lee, is there anything else you want to add?
No, just thank you so much, and I'm just so grateful, and thank you to everybody for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. A big thank you to New Orleans and Company for paying for the production of our show.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Find your favorite recipes, celebrity interviews, uplifting stories, shop our favorite deals, and so much more with the Today app. Download it now.